have with us the CEO of 1000 Watt. He's a previous president of Inman. He's been in the business for 28 years. He's an industry veteran, an innovator, really. He created some technology and stuff. And I'm going to do my best. Mr. Brian Boero.
Perfect.
Yes.
Aaron, you nailed it.
Hey, I'm coachable. You have two unique perspectives. One is you've been in this industry for a very long time. You haven't actually owned a brokerage, like that sort of thing, but you've been around marketing and real estate for, almost 3 decades. And you've watched this evolution of the structural components of real estate come together and actually in this miraculous, fantastic, very efficient thing that's truly the envy of the world. And now we're in this place in time where there seems to be like an intentional and aggressive push to dismantle it. And that's like quite interesting. And I saw you do a call about a year ago. You called it the wake up call. And you were essentially saying like, hey, I need you guys all to pay attention. Like structurally, how we do business is changing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We do lots of research as part of our work at 1000 Watt and with consumers. And we did a lot of research focused on the buy side last year for obvious reasons. All of the changes that were imposed upon the industry as a result of the trial verdict and settlement. And, it became very evident to us that buyers have no idea what an agent actually does. And they have no idea what makes a good agent good and what makes a bad agent bad. And so there was a bit of a vacuum there. And when things are changing, as they changed quite a bit last year, having your customer not really understand what it is you do and what separates you as a good practitioner from a knucklehead, that's not a good place to be in, right? So you heard last year, everybody was saying, it's time to articulate your value. It's time to articulate your value. And that's true. But we really wanted to push that deeper and say, well, how do you articulate your value? What actually is the heart of your value from the perspective of what consumers, your prospective customer, are telling us? How did they view the value, in this case, last year, of a buyer's agent? And so that's what that was really about. It's like, hey, folks, the world is changing. You need to position yourself differently than you have in the past, have different conversations than you were having with buyers in the past. It's time to really get serious and listen to your customer more intently than you may have done in the past.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. So it's like, at the time with the settlement and what's going on with NAR, clearly what's happened as a second level consequence of that is that compensation is now more variable based on market dynamics and conditions, based on, that mechanism of how the money flows changing. And I remember having a conversation with Leo Perea, the CEO of EXP, and a few other individuals, and they're like, yeah, if I had to bet, as time progresses, there will be compression on that side in terms of compensation. And I think pretty much everybody uniformly agrees with that. And what I was sharing with people a year ago was, hey, as a buyer's agent or those working on the buy side, you've actually, until now, really haven't had to make a formal presentation on a demonstration of value. You haven't had to ask, like the way that I would go in on the listing side is like, hey, here's what we do, formal presentation. Here's why we do it. Here's how we do it. And then I got to ask you for money. Where here we're having what's happened due to those structural changes is as time progresses, agents who don't pivot and start presenting formally and framing, hey, this is what I do. This is how I do it. This is why we do it. These are the different ways we can get compensated. Here's what it costs to be compensated. Here's my compensation. And here's the different ways we can get to it. Yeah. Right? If they don't do that, they're going to increasingly begin to have an issue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And to use a pretty simple analogy, sometimes I've talked about it as, you have 2 arms, okay? One of them is the list side, one of them is the buy side. And for decades and decades since real estate has been sold, we've been working out this left arm. And it's big and it's strong. And you got a big bicep. And here we just let the other one hang and it's weak, right? So we've been working out sort of the value pitch on the listing side. And we got a big, strong arm here. But because compensation was baked into the cake of the deal up until last year, we never exercised this, value proposition arm on the buy side, and it was weak. And all of a sudden, we needed to start having these conversations about compensation like we did on the list side. And most people, they'd never done that before. And that was the challenge that was presented to practitioners last year. And frankly, I think the way it's played out over the last, 8-9 months since the settlement went into effect is the change has not been as dramatic as many of us anticipated, but it is nonetheless a change. And I think that whatever has changed or has not changed, those who are able to really articulate their value to buyers, it's a huge opportunity to differentiate.
The same way that we have listing presentations, now it requires a buyer presentation with a very clear, concise value proposition, with a very clearly kind of methodical, well thought out plan and strategy that we're going to deploy on your behalf. And then it requires that I have an upfront conversation about compensation and the different ways that we can get to it. And in the event that perhaps the seller side is offering out less than what our compensation is, then we will have to make up the difference somehow, right? So that makes sense to me. And then the other thing that's very clear, which plays into this very well, the other thing I was sharing with people is that over time, if you become known as somebody who does transactions and can be trusted, then that will insulate you from these conversations about compensation. Because in the absence of value, the only thing to compete on is price. So media, these things, what we're doing today is a wonderful mechanism for essentially telling stories and for framing, right? So it's a combination where it's like, hey, number one, if you are going to work with buyers, view this like listings. It's no different. The only reason you didn't have to get a buyer brokerage agreement signed before is because you weren't mandated to. I would never in my life consider listing a property in multiple listing service without a listing agreement. You're not allowed to do it. Yeah. And now that dynamic has changed. So just approach it that way, come up with a clear, concise value stack. And just like we role play and practice on the listing side, you should start role playing, practicing your presentation on the buy side. There will be objections, practice the handlers, right? And treat it in the same way. And then simultaneously work on, because now we have these platforms where distribution's free. Yeah. Work on telling stories and framing that and being seen as a guide to help people to solve their problems in real estate, because that will insulate you from that compression. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. There are lots of ways to explain your value. And one of the mistakes, Aaron, that I see agents make is they'll say, well, I will take you on all these showings. I will handle the paperwork. I will do this long laundry list of tasks to help you buy a house. And it will take all this time. And look at all this stuff that I do. And that, in my mind, misses the point. So the more impactful approach is really to understand what is the basic need, hope, and fear of a buyer. And again, this is where we did a lot of research last year. And we did focus groups and we did survey research. And we really tried to unpack what, at the end of the day, buyers are moved by. And to put it simply, they are wanting somebody who will help them not screw this up. Yeah. This is a big, scary, risky thing to buy a house. Homes are expensive. Rates are high. Most buyers are putting all of their chips into this transaction. They need to not screw it up. So the heart of the good buyer agent's value proposition, listening to their customer, is de-risk this deal. Tell the buyer how you're going to help them get it right, how you're going to help them not buy a house that turns out to have unexpected problems that they can't afford to fix. tell them how you're going to help them pay enough to get the house, but not too much so that they overpay for the house, that question alone can be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tell them how you are going to mitigate their risk, not the 100 tasks that you will do and all of the hours that you will take.
Yeah.
That's like a surgeon talking about how he or she, cleaned and washed all of their scalpels and all of their tools, and how they prepared the room, and how they, wash their hands. At the end of the day, the surgeon's job is to fix your problem without killing you or making you sicker, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
The value discussion, I think, got a little bit off track last year in the sense that it focused on this checklist in terms of like, what is the emotional heart of what a buyer wants from you as an agent?
I agree. I think the other place it gets off track, I really love and have spent a lot of time studying Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating to me, to your point about like talking about features and amenities, agents have a tendency as well to make themselves the hero in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating about that is if you actually study storytelling, the hero is the second weakest person in the story behind the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the actual strongest character in the story is the guide.
Yeah.
And so when I see content, like I watched a guy, he posted some content recently. He's like, I was able to not only do this and not only do that. And he did what he doesn't realize. And again, I mean this lovingly. He's like, he's making himself the hero instead of framing it like, hey, here's a buyer who had this problem.
Mm-hmm.
They needed to make sure that this was going to be a smooth and easy transaction, but they also needed some down payment assistance. And they didn't know how they were going to purchase a home. And they actually thought, Brian, they were going to have to rent forever.
Yeah.
And we use this 3-step plan because what the guide does is they give a plan, right?
Yeah.
And then they call the hero to action because heroes don't take action on their own accord. The hero uses the plan, they get what they want, they avoid what they don't want. And so to your point, not only are they showing up talking about features and amenities, but they're like, by the way, I'm the hero.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a whole different conversation we could talk about for hours. And, I think that the industry, generally speaking, absent, a more nuanced and customer-centric view of the transaction and everybody's role in it, has relied on one proof point, and that is success.
Yep.
I am a top producer. I am number one in this neighborhood or this market, which is fine. That's an important proof point, but we have over-indexed on it. And it's not particularly nuanced. And if somebody is questioning the whole game that we play here, then you need to move beyond just, I'm number one, I sell X, Y, or Z subdivision, and I'm the best and the baddest and the coolest, and, it's all about me. So I agree with you, Aaron. We need to move beyond that because there are, I'll leave it at that. I agree with you.
Yeah. Good. So, and what I wrote down as we were speaking is like what comes up for me and what I share with agents all the time is that leading with authority is actually the lowest form of influence.
Yeah.
And really in that story brand, the hero has to deploy the guide has to deploy two things for someone to recognize them as a guide. The first is actual empathy. And that speaks to your point. Like, hey, I understand this is scary. I get it. Like, you really don't want to, you want to make sure you're not making a mistake. You don't want to buy a lemon. Like, you don't want all these things to happen. So the first thing is empathy. And the second thing is competency. And I think what's happened is from a marketing perspective, to your point, we've over-indexed on authority to demonstrate competency when in fact, I always like to ask crowds, I'm like, hey, how many of you guys have been in the presence of somebody who have asked a series of detailed questions that cause you to recognize that they understand this process very, very well? And they are asking you questions that you didn't even contemplate or think about. And by that alone, you understand that they have competency. And they're like, oh yeah, happens all the time. So I'm like, why are you doing the opposite then? Right.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So, and that's how it's affecting the buy side. So it's clear for agents. All right, cool. This is continuing to develop. And this is really, if you want to continue to thrive and get your unfair share, again, be conscious and purposeful about the frames that you're setting and these platforms that you have to get your story out about how you can solve buyers' problems, get clear on what those problems are, have a formal presentation, role play it, practice it, present it, that whole thing.
Yeah, get comfortable asking money. But I would say, Aaron, and this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Mm-hmm. So we need to practice how we articulate what we do. And role-playing, scripts, all of that, great. I think as an industry, let me put it this way. You need to be as good as your scripts are.
Yeah.
Right? We focus a lot on do this, do that. Here's what you should say when. And we don't focus enough on making sure that the person saying those things is actually competent. But that's a bigger macro industry.
Yeah. 100%. And I think it stems from initially that the barrier to entry is a 75 on a test, having $1,000 and not being a felon.
Pretty much. Yes.
So it's a super, and I love that you brought that up because I'm operating under the assumption when we're saying like, hey, make sure that, these are kind of best practices moving forward. If you're going to work on the buy side, have a formal presentation like that. We're operating under the assumption that you know what you're doing.
For sure.
Yeah. Which is good.
Sadly, at least half of the agents in the United States of America really don't.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of its origin source issue is because that barrier to entry. And then what's happened as a kind of over time is that brokerage firms have abdicated that responsibility and they've outsourced it to like other people.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
And I want to make sure we touch on how things are starting to play out on the sell side. So,
yeah.
On the buy side, it was like, it was this big hubbub. Oh my gosh, agents are going to make less money. It's not actually what played out over time. It's had less of an impact. Surely there has been some compression, particularly if there's multiple offer situations. Seller's going to go with the best price, the best terms, the best commission.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, okay, that's fine. And people have adapted. What we're starting to see now, this year in 2025, we've had almost like weekly, these very, interesting developments, right? So it started off with Compass aggressively pushing this private exclusive thing. And really it's a business strategy with the goal and objective of being profitable, masquerading as choice. You know what I mean? And then they're like, hey, we want to market properties independent. NAR makes a kind of a wishy-washy decision. They don't make anybody happy, right? And they kind of open up the door a little bit. Compass pushes in, and then Zillow and Redfin says, hey, just if you do that, you will never have access to our platform in perpetuity. And they have, I don't know, between them and Redfin, 30% of all traffic online, something like that. Wild, right? So they're the gorilla in the room. And then the MLS system follows suit and says, hey, you know what? If you keep doing that, we're going to cut off your IDX feed, right? In preparation for connecting, I put myself in the place of the consumer who may be looking at this from the outside. It's like, hey man, I just want to buy and sell. And you guys seem to be fighting amongst each other. What are you guys doing?
This issue, boy, I'll tell you, it's a doozy. And, I've thought about it a lot and I know a lot of people involved and I've written about it. And, at the end of the day, it's really driven by the fact that it has become harder, very hard, to make a real estate brokerage work as a business.
Yep.
And margins have been eroding for real estate brokers for years and years and years. You see a little bit of macro commission compression, and it doesn't take much to push a brokerage into the red. And it's very, very tough to run a brokerage these days, particularly if you're running an office-dependent sort of bricks and mortar model, traditional, if you want to call it that. And so what that has done is it has forced this conversation around how do we get to be profitable? And from that, you get Compass's Great Crusade to make listings private, at least for a period of time. And in so doing, create a magnet for buyers who will be drawn to work with a Compass agent because that will be the only way they will see this private inventory for a period of time at least. They have developed what they call the 3-stage marketing program, which, look, I don't agree with Compass, but at least it's a different story. It's a differentiated story they can tell sellers. And then it's a great recruiting lever that they can pull. So they're just trying to be a big traditional brokerage that's trying to make money. And I understand that completely. It's rational and understandable that a business model that is struggling to be viable would pursue the strategy of going hard at scale at private listings. I get it. My problem with it is that the collateral damage is grave, and that ultimately this issue becomes whatever you think about the MLS or this broker or that broker. Everybody's accusing everybody else of being anti-competitive and on the wrong side of the DOJ or the law. Who cares? This question ultimately is about what kind of housing market do we want in the United States of America? Do we want one that is broadly open, or do we want one that is siloed and at least partially closed off?
Mm-hmm.
That is really the question. Do we want an open housing market, or do we want a closed housing market? And for better or for worse, and there are lots of gripes about the MLS that I understand, the MLS allows everybody to have multiple doors to walk through to find a home. Any buyer is able to go to any office or any agent or 1,000 or 10,000 websites in their market to see the available homes for sale. That is a miraculous thing that is unique to North America, period. And the idea that we would sacrifice this thing that creates efficiency, fairness, openness, and keeps the door to housing open for all, the fact that we would sacrifice that seems to me, number one, wrong. Number two, stupid for the industry and for the consumer. And ultimately, number three, I think it's stupid for Compass because I think they're going to come to regret ever kicking this hornet's nest.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it is a lightning rod of litigation and peril that will make their goal and their quest for profitability seem trivial.
I agree. And I think it's interesting because I think it's fascinating to me to see kind of commentary. I posted stuff on this and to see kind of agents' response. And there seems to be like this pervasive kind of thought process that like MLS systems and Zillow and these aggregators of data are like evil and bad. And what I'm aware of is, I said to my wife, Carla, because, we sold real estate for 17 years, about 2,000 transactions. We were able to do like 100 deals a year, 10 years in a row, 200 deals a year twice. I looked at her and I said, without those platforms, there is no way possible that I would have been able to do that, to be able to serve that many families. And I think the thing that's missed, it seems to me like a little bit of professional animosity where like, hey, Zillow figured out a way to extract capital from listing inventory and we didn't. Like, okay, that's the way it is. At the same time, though, they've provided transparency and it actually helps us to facilitate transactions faster and quicker and help other people to build lots of wealth. So it's all part of an ecosystem that actually makes us, as you mentioned, in terms of like an industry and the structure of how we do business, legitimately the complete envy of the world. Where I was talking to Leo about it. He's like, yeah, I sold a home for his family. Like it was in another country. He's like, you know how long it took to sell? 4 years.
I bought a place in Italy 3 years ago and it was very instructive. There is no MLS. You have to go to individual real estate offices. They have a couple of portals, but those portals are incomplete. The data is not up to date. I had no idea what recent sales prices were. I had no idea what market trends were. Had no idea what to pay for a house. My wife and I were feeling around in the dark. And that is not a healthy, fair, open housing market. So I think to take us in that direction is, let's just say it wasn't a good user experience for myself and my wife.
Yeah.
It's real estate done in the shadows, and bad things happen in the shadows. So you have an increased propensity for bias, double dealing. We should be doing this in the light of day, and that's what the MLS makes possible. And I don't think, look, you don't have to love Zillow or hate Zillow in this debate. And I have plenty of thoughts on the portals, good, bad, or otherwise. But look, Zillow came out with a policy and said, we're not going to take these listings that started out as private. And they did that because, well, they're a business too, just like Compass.
That's right.
I also, and I've written this, two things can be true at once. Mm-hmm. Zillow can be doing this to protect their business, and they could be doing it motivated by profit, but they could also be right on this particular issue, even if you can't stand Zillow generally.
That's right.
Look, to get into this Zillow whatever, the issue again is we are being forced to fight over the very fabric and structure of our housing market. That's what this is about. It's not about Zillow, blah, 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 blah.
No, and it seems to be about control of data. And, I think that what you're saying is complete accurate in the sense that I know that company retained dollar to brokerage firms has gone down by like 50% over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And so they used to, keep 50 cents of every dollar. Now it's more like, 5 to 8 cents of every dollar. So increasingly that model, that vehicle of doing business is becoming more challenging. And I would argue is in fact at an existential place. And that shows up if you study Michael Del Pretti's data and everything. He does a great job of, aggregating and making sense of it. It's showing up in the numbers where, these platforms, whether it be Zillow or CoStar or whatever, they're highly profitable, and cloud-based brokerages where they've eliminated those expenses are profitable. And ones that have not done that, it's becoming increasingly more difficult for them to be profitable. And they're having to come up with
ways to make a real estate brokerage profitable. There are. And the folks at T3 do a great survey of this and baseline and profitability. It's all out there. There are ways to make a brokerage work financially. Okay. So you have, the virtual brokerage model, which EXP really pioneered. Okay. That's one way to do it. Mm-hmm. You can build a great, what we would call home services or core services model, where you have a company-owned mortgage company, an insurance company, a closing and title company. Howard Hanna does that beautifully. They run that model extremely well. Home Services America runs that model extremely well. There are ways to make real estate brokerage profitable. It's really hard, but there are ways to make it profitable without taking down the integrity of the housing market that has been built here in the United States over 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point where it's like, hey, I get that you're a business and you borrowed a bunch of money and you're trying to be profitable. At the same time, the strategy that you're choosing has second and third level consequences that ultimately we would both agree would not serve the whole. Yeah. So then I guess the question is, all right, all this stuff's going on. I'm also aware that all of these platforms, all of the aggregators, all the MLS systems, they need one thing like oxygen to breathe. Without it, they all die, which is data. And that's listings. Mm-hmm. So if you are, what I've been sharing with agents, I'm curious to get your perspective. If you are, I don't even consider myself like a like a listing agent. I'm a prodigious provider of data. And because trust me, if they could cut me out to get the data, they would 1,000,000 trillion %. So if I can continue to provide the machine what it needs, like oxygen to breathe, I will continue to be disproportionately rewarded for my efforts. So independent of like how that's all going down, if I just keep listing property in high volume, like I'll be okay.
Look, here's my view on this, like pulling way back and looking at it and looking at it over time. Because as I said, I'm 1,000 years old and I've been around this business since the late 90s. I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot. Look, we like to complain in this industry about portals, about loss of control, about all of these things. And the reality is, and I say this with love and respect, that this industry has a problem with loyalty, and it has a problem in terms of focusing on client retention. And that failure to be good at client retention and to be good at loyalty has resulted in these companies. Zillow would not exist if agents and brokers had been a lot better at keeping their clients close. You know, I've said this 1,000 times, Aaron. If you think about this, an online lead in almost every case is simply a client that was abandoned or lost by another agent. That's all an online lead is, right? Even first-time home buyers, because you should have got the referral from one of their friends, their parents, their sister, their cousin, whatever. An online lead is simply another agent's abandoned client. And if the industry had been better about keeping our clients close, you've seen the stats from NAR and others, right? 85, 90% of people are happy with their agent at the end of the transaction. 80 to 90% of those people who are happy use somebody else the next time, because we have been conditioned to think about the top of the funnel, get the lead, convert the lead, do the deal, do another one, do another one, do another one, and have not put enough effort into keeping our clients close and thinking long-term. And that has resulted in this state of affairs that many in the industry can't stand and complain about. So it's never too late, right? It's never too late, right? To start thinking long-term and to put as much energy into retention and loyalty as we do into new client acquisition.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm also aware, which I think you would agree, that all the leverage for agents long-term is on the listing side of transactions because of the way that the system requires that data. So the combination of focusing on that side of the business with loyalty is the magic formula to make yourself kind of insulate yourself and make yourself very difficult to push out. And so you get your unfair share of the, opportunities to serve and help other people. Yeah. Perfect. Well, listen, man, I appreciate you taking the time. It'll be very fun and exciting to see how things shake out, because I'm imagining that there will be some big headlines as time progresses over the next year. So if you're open to it, I'd love to reconnect again and see your thoughts on it. If people want to find you or they want to connect with you or engage with 100 or 1,000 watt, like how could they do that?
Go to our website. It's 1000watt.net. So 1000watt.net. If you want to get a sense for what we're about, subscribe to our newsletter, The Dose. You can do that on the website. It goes out every Tuesday. It's free. It's a mix of thinking about the industry, but also from our position as a strategy and creative agency. It's full of ideas. And we also share a little bit of our consumer research. So I would encourage everybody that wants to get a sense for what we're about to subscribe to that. And that's the best way, Aaron. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. It's been an enjoyable conversation, Brian. Thank you. And check him out. He knows his stuff. I look forward to reconnecting soon.
Right on. Thanks, Aaron.
Be well. You sat 70 open houses a month and drove Uber in the evenings at the beginning of your career?
About 70 open houses my first year in real estate. I just left a high-paying engineering job, paid my ex-wife to leave, which is another story.